everyone. It's me one more time. I am going to use this video to talk to you about how you can integrate previous work that teams have done in other conservation by design modules into the theory of change format or workshop so that they make sure that they're just moving forward and not leaving any of that previous work behind or having a feeling of redoing any of it. So I'm not going to cover every single conservation by design module, but I am going to cover the 4 modules that most directly feed into specific elements of the theory of change. So let me go ahead and share my screen just to kind of give you a sense of what I'm going to cover. So first of all, I'll be covering situation analysis, which feeds into the problems portion of the theory of change. I'll cover next will be interested parties module, which feeds into the key parties or interested parties element of the theory of change. Third, I will cover defining objectives, which helps support the goal and outcomes portion of the theory of change. And finally, strategy selection, which helps support strategic approaches. I will also briefly cover how theory of change feeds into the MEL module, just to help give a sense of how this module can be brought forward in the process. Okay, so moving over to the mural board, starting with situation analysis, which again can feed into the problem section of the theory of change. So the situation analysis module really is, I think, an extraordinarily useful preparatory step to theory of change. And so as a facilitator, by the way, if you are sensing that a team might not have like a clear mind map of how different root causes and consequences fit together to form the problemscape, I highly recommend doing CBD's situation analysis module. But anyway, the output from that module includes the team sort of identifying a core primary interest, which is sort of the problem space, if you will, that they are focused around. And then they sort of identify a set of cascading root causes and consequences with different nodes kind of coming off of the primary interest. And so you end up with something that looks like a tree with roots, if you will, where you have like, a bunch of key root coming off of the primary interests that are the root causes. And then those flesh out into like, what are the next levels of root causes underneath those? And then the same thing on the consequences. So what are the key like direct consequences coming off of the primary interest, and then the consequences that further stem from those. And so teams, after they kind of create this tree, if you will, they then as a last step in situation analysis, highlight the opportunity areas within that map of causes and consequences. So they might be tracing like a specific pathway from the primary interest out to a consequences or a consequence or a root cause down through. And those kind of opportunity areas are areas that they have said, these are areas that we feel like we can make a difference. And so usually what I would do going into a theory of change workshop where a team has a fresh situation analysis, I would include as basically items that are pre-filled here, all of the primary consequences and primary root causes or problems that directly stem off of that primary interest. And then I would also include any nodes that are along those opportunity areas that the team has identified. And so this initial set should give you a pretty good like subset of the content from the situation analysis as a starting point. And then what the team needs to do is they need to sort of get that content into a shape where it will fit on a theory of change. So it might be like creating, problems that kind of encapsulate a couple of the themes, or like choosing the ones that are the most important ones to have represented. So hopefully that is a good starting place for you. One thing I also want to mention is that sometimes the problems that come out of the situation analysis aren't always like properly scoped to what they should be in a theory of change. As I talk about in the video on problems specifically, we really try to encourage teams to scope the problems that are represented on their theory of change to specifically what the team can make a difference in. So scope it to the geographic area. Talk not just about the deep root consequence or root cause of climate change, but the thing that is caused by climate change that the team can actually address. That's the one thing to keep in mind. Okay, that's situation analysis. The second one is interested parties, which feeds pretty directly into key parties. One thing that is a little different about this is I'm just going to say, I think that if teams have recently done interested parties, that is a much more thorough deep dive into what this key party step of the theory of change can cover. And so if the team has recently done that exercise, you might even consider just entirely skipping this portion of the workshop or using it as a moment to simply refresh memories, check back in on if there have been any learnings or further understanding of the context since that module that we maybe want to add a couple more parties in. But the exercises in this workshop are a little different than what teams do in interested parties, but I would say it's because there's a short amount of time that we have to work with here compared to the amount of time spent on this topic in interested parties. And if you've recently done that full module, they're going to be less useful for the team. Yeah. Could also be interesting to have like a quick conversation maybe on some of the opportunity areas of like where further investment or further understanding of certain key parties could help advance the work. So there's always conversations, that can be useful. Okay. Defining objectives, which that module feeds into the goals and outcomes portion of the theory of change workshop. So the output of the defining objectives module is a set of fundamental objectives and related sub-objectives that sort of describe the team's desired ultimate outcomes or ends for their strategy. And these objectives are presented both as a diagram and as a narrative statement. And so what we recommend is really taking that narrative version and consider using that as a starting point for the goal portion of the theory of change. And then the objectives, the sub-objectives that are the other output of the defining objectives module can really be a helpful reference or starting point for the outcomes. And one thing I'll mention is that some teams are using that defining objectives module to identify connections to the 2030 outcomes. Some are not. But you might want to just make sure you're aware of the extent to which the team has had that portion of the conversation, which can be a really helpful starting point for the team. And if they've already had that conversation about how our objectives connect to the 2030 outcomes, or what I'm talking about when I say that is the 17 2030 metrics. If the team has a good idea of that, we want to make sure we're including that as a starting point for the team. But if they haven't, that can be a good conversation to have at this moment. I think just overall, like it's always, like I've said for these other modules, it's always helpful to have sort of a refresher conversation or, just a check back to make sure that things are looking and feeling right. And again, there might need to be some adjustment in terms of format to get it to sort of fit and work in the context of a theory of change format, but you should be pretty well set up for success here already. Okay, the final one is the strategy selection. So this relates to the strategic approaches portion of the workshop, which was previously known as activities for some teams who did a really old version of the workshop. But anyway, the output from the strategy selection module should already fit pretty neatly into the recommended theory of change format. Likely the team has sort of landed on sort of a core set of high-level strategies. And often if teams have done that exercise coming into the theory of change already or done that module, this exercise becomes a helpful moment to check back in on the logic of how those strategic approaches fit with the problems, the key parties, the goals and outcomes. So as stated, like, let's just make sure, the strategic approaches we've landed on, do they actually address the problems that we've chosen? Do they address the goals and outcomes? Is there anything missing? Do we feel like there's a gap anywhere, either in any of those sections or in the strategic approaches? And that it's, this is the moment to change and adjust stuff, or at least flag an issue if there are any gaps in sort of, that initial fit. And so, yeah, based on that discussion, the team might choose to sort of rephrase some of the strategic approaches to make the logical connections clearer, or even add or remove one or two strategic approaches if they're finding that, or they can also, choose to adjust what are the problems that we feel like are actually in scope based on, how all of that plays out. Okay. So that's all on those 4 modules. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes now talking about how the theory of change can feed into the MEL, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning process. So first, this, assuming you have an output that looks roughly like this and at least includes these elements, the key operative elements will be the assumptions and the intermediate results. The assumptions portion, that we want to, the point of a MEL plan is to support the team in having the correct evidence come in the door that they're collecting so that they can make informed decisions, evidence-informed decisions about their strategy moving forward. And so, as part of that, the assumptions should be forming, should be really represented in the MEL plan, in that they are sort of the basis for the key learning questions that the MEL plan hopefully will help the team answer. So, those assumptions should be the key risks or logic caps that should translate into, some of the key questions that the MEL plan helps answer. And the intermediate results are, hopefully the mechanism through which we can answer those questions. So assumptions are important, leading into MEL. But the bulk of the MEL module really focuses on honing in on a couple of 1 or 2 near-term intermediate results that the team can then sort of go through the exercise of creating a MEL plan around those in the module. And then after the module, if they need to continue that exercise for any of the other intermediate results on their theory of change, they can do that on their own. So the first step of the MEL module is actually honing in on what are the most important IRs for us to be creating, including in our MEL plan right now. So the prioritization questions that the team will be asked are, which of our IRs will provide the first or earliest indication that the strategic approaches and the team's outputs are sort of influencing the world and turning into results. Another question is what IRs on this map do we expect to achieve first? And really thinking about the 6 to 18 month time frame, because again, the IRs that are going to matter most are the ones that matter first. Or I should say, the ones that matter most right now are the ones that matter first, because those are the ones that we have to be working towards in the immediate future. Which of the IRs are the best leading indicators of actually achieving the outcomes? And which IRs are testing the riskiest or most uncertain areas of the theory of change? And hopefully the team has a really good sense of that coming out of the theory of change module and the way we've really tried to tie assumptions and IRs together. So, the extent to which the team can kind of have some of that conversation about IRs prior to going into MEL, that can be really useful, and can help speed the team up during their MEL workshop so they can focus on, the meat of the MEL planning at that time. All right, that's all. Good luck, folks, and I hope that these materials were useful for you, and please don't hesitate to send me some feedback or ideas on how to improve this content if you feel like you have ideas of how to do that. So thanks so much, and best of luck.